right, I'm unmuting.
Okay. Hello.
Good morning, everyone. We want to thank you. Michelle and I are excited about this webinar presentation, and we're excited to share this information. I think our main goal has been just to get this knowledge out there and to be able to give parents an idea of some things that they may be seeing with their children, and an idea of, you know, some strategies and where you can go if you are seeing any of these particular signs or anything with your child as far as sensory processing is concerned. Our very first slide is our content and financial disclosure slide. I'm a presenter for TalkTools, and they do pay me an honorarium for speaking. There's no relevant non-financial relationship to disclose, and Michelle has no relevant non-financial relationship to disclose as well. She does have 2 books, and you can, I believe she'll have a website that she can share with you as well. If we look at our slide number 3, we will see that when we see a child who is, and this basically gets to the heart of what we're seeing, is that we see children that come into therapy, or we may have our own child who maybe is always chewing on something, or can't seem to sit still, or who only eats certain foods, like they have to have only bland foods or only pureed foods. Their parents may say that they're a picky eater, or they have to have the tags cut out of their shirts, or when they go to a birthday party, they seemed very overwhelmed by the number of people in the room, or have to cover their ears because of the loud noise that other children make. These are all things that can represent a child who has a sensory processing disorder. And what sensory processing is the way the nervous system responds to sensory messages and how they turn those responses into actions. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I think one of the things that was so hard for us was, yes, there was a response to sensory information for Elizabeth, but it wasn't the proper one. So instead of enjoying a bath, it made her cry. And instead of, you know, the response to walking on the grass is maybe there was, oh, that feels so nice, but in her case, it was offensive and she screamed. So I think that's such a great definition of it, because it's how it turns it into the appropriate response. You know, if you hear a car horn beep, you're going to jump out of the road because you're afraid, but you shouldn't have that same motor response elicited by a bathtub. So I think that's a very clear way to give a definition of it.
Exactly. So if we talk about sensory processing disorder, this is a disorder is a way in which the nervous system responds to the input from the senses and how it turns them into inappropriate behavioral or motor responses. So, and this is that then would become a sensory processing disorder. So the child is unable to interpret that response that they receive. For example, like Michelle said, from touching the grass on their feet to know that, you know what, this is okay, this is just grass. And instead they have that response of they feel scared. It puts them into that fight or flight mode. And we see this in therapy. Oftentimes, you know, therapists will ask a child to do something, and the child is able to complete that action, for example, chewing on a chew tube, and then when they go to ask them later in the session to do it, the child is refusing. And oftentimes, you know, therapists or parents may see this as a behavior. Oh, my child, you know, they're just being lazy, or they don't want to do it. And it may actually be because their nervous system is not allowing them to respond to that information. If we look next,
I don't mean to, but I think one of the things that is so great to understand this is because many therapists will say, oh, you did it one time. I don't see any reason why you shouldn't be able to do it the second time. But if you don't give credit to what's going on in the nervous system of the child, then you will become a frustrated therapist. And we have been down the road with some who were angry at Elizabeth because she said, well, last week she did that. And I'd say, yes, last week she did, but then this week she's crying. And they said, can't you fix it? Can't you make her stop? And you know, when you recognize it, you're on a whole nother path with the child, you know, just so much better. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah. If we look at the actual statistics, and this is given to us by the Sensory Processing Foundation, we'll see that the actual numbers for sensory processing disorder is that 1 in 20 children are affected by some sort of sensory processing disorder in their daily lives. And there's even some information that suggests 1 in every 6 children experience sensory processing symptoms that may be significant enough to affect aspects of their daily life function. And I think the main point for us is that, you know, it doesn't matter if you are a teacher, a therapist, a parent, we have to be aware of this, because that is what is going to allow a child to be successful, and we want them to be successful in their daily activities. Something, you know, you may say, well, you know, my child doesn't like this or that. It only is a concern when it affects their daily function in life and their daily activities. And that's when it becomes a concern. So I think, you know, if we go now to our next slide, Michelle will be able to tell you a little bit from a parent's point of view, her story.
Okay. For those that don't know, my daughter Elizabeth, who's currently 20, was diagnosed at 2.5 with sensory processing disorder and global dyspraxia. And I know they're comorbid, so both basically if you have one, you have a degree of another, and it differs per child. But I separated them as I felt I could best deal with activities to suit each need. But her sensory processing disorder presented in the aversion, meaning everything felt wrong to her, everything was offensive. So her coping, because she was nonverbal till 5, was to cry and to scream and to cry. So when we had her diagnosed, we went into therapy, so with occupational therapy, and we started doing, you know, I said desensitization, that is not how it is, but it was a good way to understand it a little bit at a time. She was able to tolerate more activities and more sensations, and we just, you know, we would build. We did the brushing protocol, the Wahlberger protocol, which is something that is to be looked at. It's all individual as well. And then we've done speech therapy since she was 2, and in many forms. We have, you know, articulation work, we had oral motor work, we've had social skills training for back and forth conversations, and we've made gains in Elizabeth. But it is advocacy that is what we're talking about, because if you realize if the sensory processing is big enough and or significant enough to affect everyday life, then think of who is in their life every day, and those are the very people who you need to become aware and on your same page, so everybody understands your child. Because I can remember times where I would have said something to the teacher and something to the aide, and then I was asked by the gym teacher, why does she just sit around and stare at the floor all day in gym? And I thought, wow, didn't talk to the gym teacher, need to add that to my list, you know. And so through my work of being her advocate, I gained like my sea legs, as it were, and I was able to get a plan of who will be the people we will reach to every year and what you tell them. So through doing all that, we've talked to them about Elizabeth, and we've made our gains, and we've done our work with Elizabeth, and we're still working. I mean, she's 20 years old. But our journey was with occupational, with speech, with we do therapeutic music, we do tutoring. I mean, we just have it all. But I think, again, as you do the work with them, life becomes work. There's opportunities in your day that you don't even know you can teach, don't even know there's opportunities just all around you, you know, to teach, to learn, to therapy, without it being like sitting them down at a table and saying, you know, we're going to do it work now. Because life, you can't script your life, so you can't say, I'm going to teach everything for them. You have to teach as life approaches them and work with them, because that's what you want. You want them to blend as well into the world and be successful as they can be. And that's the mindset. So if you see it as a journey and not a race, not a sprint, you'll make some good headway. So like I said, again, Elizabeth has done very well in her life. We still have misarticulations. They're habit at this point because she'll self-correct. She still has sensory issues, but because we are able to work in talking more in her life with her, we can dialogue beautifully. So we've come from a crying 2.5-year-old to a child attending college with supports. So it's a long journey, but again, starting point is to identify and to help everybody understand your child so that all of you en masse move forward. Is that enough?
Sure, yeah. I mean,
I know,
it's good.
I could take the 2 hours.
Yeah. I know.
We have a question.
Sure.
If you want me to unmute Anna. Let me see.
Okay.
Okay, so Anna, you're unmuted if you want to ask the question. Your question. Yeah. Anna? Okay. We'll go back to her.
Okay.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay.
So, go ahead, Michelle. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I was going to say, I mean, I'm good. If there was a question, that was great, but I'm okay. I'm good.
Okay. Okay. So we're just, the next part of our talk is we're going to talk about, there are 8 senses that we know of. In 5 senses that we really hear a lot about. And these particular 5 senses that we hear about, and these are oftentimes what therapists learn about in school, is sight, smell, hearing, touch, and taste. But there are other senses that are also important for us, and those are proprioception and vestibular. Those are subconscious senses. And there are senses that we get, so proprioception is the pressure, the input to your joints and your bones. And movement, which is vestibular, is your underlying foundation for all your other senses. So your vestibular is what gives you that information of where your body is in space. So for children that, you know, you may see one of our first examples on that first thing was a child comes into therapy and they run and they hide, or we notice that they try to get into very small confined spaces, or they like really a lot of deep pressure. That is their proprioception and their proprioception system telling them that they want that input. So one of the things, if you see a child that comes into therapy or they're in school and they try to run and hide and get under a table, it may not be that that's the behavior that they're doing. It might be because that's what their sensory system is requesting and needing in order for them to feel organized and to be able to participate in an activity in class. Michelle, would you agree?
I was going to add in, it's interesting you say that, because when we flash back to when Elizabeth was very, very little, she would give her sister a hug that was like a crushing hug. Like Emily would be laying down on the couch and Elizabeth would, and we'd say, oh my gosh, you know, that's such a great hug for her sister, because of course, you know, wasn't that wonderful? And when you see, so just tune your eyes to things, because you could say, wow, that she did, but it was, they were always so big, and that was definitely her seeking that deep pressure. But again, if you don't recognize that, you would, again, because we didn't then, you'd say, okay, that's just such a nice amount of love for her sister, and you know. So.
And we see that too, like with sometimes you'll see like a parent that will be roughhousing with their child, and then their child takes off and takes a swing at him. And you know, they just went from in a moment where they were having fun and laughing to where it can be perceived as the child took it too far, or they became aggressive. And that actually just is their sensory system not being able to respond to how much pressure they're actually giving or how forceful their body is needing. Their body can't regulate that. Right. And unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time to go into that today, but if we look at our next slide, there's a third hidden sense. And this is a really important sense that people often miss, and it is the interoceptive sense. This is the sense in your body that gives you the ability to know, am I hungry? Am I thirsty? Do I have to go to the restroom? So oftentimes kids that, you know, maybe are still, you know, wetting the bed, or that may have accidents in school, it could be because they don't have this particular sense in their body is either under responsive or it's over responsive. So under responsive would be an issue where, you know, they didn't know they had to go to the bathroom until it was too late. Right. An over response to that would be they're asking to go to the bathroom nonstop, because even the slightest bit of feeling like they have to go to the bathroom makes them not want to have that feeling. So those would just be some examples. Michelle?
Right, and you know, Elizabeth would be the one who had the issue with the hidden sense of hunger, because nobody could believe that she was hungry 2/3 of the day. I mean, but it was not understanding hunger and full, you know. And so you know, we would always say, oh, she was blessed with a great metabolism, and that was true, so we weren't worried, but it was not what should be. You know, we had to teach portion, we had to teach, hey, look, at this is the time you're going to do this, and you can have this much. I mean, you don't want to deny in the event she was truly hungry, that would be sad. So you have to teach some of these things, and like even restroom breaks, that's something that's scheduled at school, perhaps, if you have a teacher who is open to maintaining that schedule for you. I mean, there are ways to teach all these things, but yes, we did experience a tremendous amount of the hunger part of it as, you know, she was doing her thing.
Yeah, and I think it's just, it's an important thing to note, you know, if you're a parent, or because I think too, as a parent or even as a therapist, you know, you get to a point and you're thinking, okay, you know, the child keeps doing this. There has to be something, you know, what's going on here? There has to be an underlying thing. And I think Michelle would agree with me in saying that, you know, as a parent, you have to trust your instinct, because many times, you know, you're not crazy, you know, you're not making this up, but something is going on, and it's just a matter of finding someone to listen to you.
But you have to, and really that's what guides me to this day, is that feeling like this is the next right step. This is something I have to do. Yes, I may appear to be the biggest pain the school has ever seen, but I am driven to make sure you get what I need you to get for Elizabeth. You know, you do have her the majority of the day. Think about it. And the school has our children a tremendous hunk of the day. You know, we get the beginning, we get the end, but all that, you know, so definitely listen to your inner voice for sure.
And I think for me as a speech therapist, you know, I learned about the 5 different sensory systems, but then that's pretty much where our education stopped. Oftentimes we think about sensory processing and a child that has sensory needs as someone that needs OT. And as you'll see when we talk next, that's definitely true. A child with sensory processing needs does need to see an OT, but I think we as speech therapists, as physical therapists, as teachers also need to understand that that child's sensory needs don't just stop when they leave occupational therapy. that child's sensory needs will be affecting our speech therapy session, our physical therapy session. It will also be affecting their activities in
think about
classroom.
If you have, if you're in that fight or flight, your mind, your body, your everything is in that anxious moment. You're not going to process the steps for speech. You're not going to be open to having someone touch your mouth. You're just going to, that child's just going to be this ball of anxiety. I always say, think about the thing that you fear the most. Okay, for me, it would be a snake. Put it in the room here, and you could be talking to me. I will hear nothing you're saying because I'm going to be anxious. And if that child is that way for speech, even if they have had OT, the success of your speech therapy isn't going to be good until that child reaches a nice homeostatic moment.
I agree totally. Yes. If we, so, now.
Do you want to take a question real quick?
Sure.
Okay, it's from Gayatri, and she is asking, or they are asking, is squeezing mom's heavy arms a request for deep pressure? And what about slamming jaws against another person or against his own palm? Please help.
I mean, in my opinion, yes. I would think that if someone is doing those type of actions, they are basically telling you that they need that input. Mm-hmm. When they are slamming either their own jaw or into something, they're trying to get information, in my opinion, without knowing the whole situation, to their temporomandibular joint. We know that one of the sites of organizing and calming for all of us is our temporomandibular joint. And we get a lot of input from accessing that joint. For many of us, we do that through speaking and through eating a wide variety of foods. But for children who cannot do those things, they will try to get that information by doing other things, by chewing on their shirt, by chewing on pin caps, or biting their fingernails, sucking their thumb. Kids that, hit their jaw, that's just a way for them to try to seek that input.
I would say so completely, because Elizabeth used to bite her jaw real tight like this, just clenching. So same idea without the hitting, I feel. And at some point when she, there were suggestions made by the OT and speech therapist on things we could do to offer the input in an appropriate manner. So that, and that would definitely be something to ask about, because of course, any option you give has to be, safe for the child, safe for anything, because it's all unique, but definitely something to seek, definitely something to note and to take to whomever you have working with your child.
Definitely.
Yeah. So, you were going.
Did that help? Okay. The next steps that we're going to talk about is, okay, so now that, I may know that I may suspect that my child has a sensory processing problem or a disorder, what can I do? And this is where you really need to start utilizing what's out there. And I don't know, Michelle, if you want to kind of...
I'll grab the baton here.
Okay.
Because this is just in my wheelhouse. Yes, no, you do. You definitely have to educate yourself. Read as much as you can. The more you read, the more you can pull from different people's information and see how it affects your child. Because once you get a picture of how SPD affects your child in their day, how much, to what degree, then go through the checklist, because we there are available on that website for spdstar.org for the preschooler, for the toddler. There's even for adults too. And then you can go through and see, because once you have your checklist, you can present to somebody. And this is how I feel. I have seen in my day-to-day life, which is huge versus an hour you're going to have with the doctor or professional. This is how I see it affecting my child. And then that's when you can start to say, what do you think to someone? Because you're not going to get your child to replicate a sensory problem in that doctor's office in the manner that you would see him hiding behind a chair. Yes, he may be screaming in the office, but that's not going to give the doctor or therapist or whomever a true picture. So you definitely have to research, you definitely have to use a checklist, and then after you feel you have a lot of the things out of your head and onto paper, it's a really wonderful time to go ahead and to start to look for the professional diagnoses. Are you comfortable with that, Monica? Do you want to add anything into before the slide switches?
No, I mean, definitely. I feel like, you know, knowledge is power and is fire. And, you know, even for professionals, you know, seek out the information. I think the SPD STAR Institute is a great start.
Mm-hmm.
It's founded by Dr. Lucy Miller, and she was a student under Dr. Jane Ayers. And I believe that, you know, they have a lot of great information available for parents and professionals, and I would highly recommend that. And don't be afraid. I mean, especially if this isn't your area, don't be afraid to, you know, to start looking for that information, because then you'll know at least the questions that you need to ask.
Oh, I agree. I agree. Don't be afraid, because honestly, you can only do good by learning. You really can't. There cannot be a downside to finding a path for your child, period. You know.
Right.
So I'm 100% agreeing with you. So I think the next slide was how to get your child the evaluation and the diagnosis, right? We listed the 3 professionals who can make said diagnoses, which would be the developmental pediatrician, the neuropsychologist, and the pediatric neurologist, and those would see your child. I think we mentioned in the article that we wrote for the Parenting Special Needs magazine that in your area, that's where the limiting factor might come in, is what's available in your area. But you know, it may take a little bit of work. It may take networking on some websites to see what professionals they have listed. Correct, Monica? And then to see if you can find, you know, if you can find out what is available in your area is a great step, because sometimes there is a long wait to get an evaluation done.
And it doesn't mean that, and that's just in order to receive a professional diagnosis. It doesn't mean that an occupational therapist can't evaluate your child and recommend activities or start working on some of the sensory deficits. That almost probably needs to happen very soon, and you'll probably have more likelihood of getting in with an occupational therapist who specializes in sensory processing disorder. So, you know, I would recommend doing that as soon as possible.
I would agree, and that's true. And if there was, and definitely if I made it seem like you needed the evaluation first, I think you need to investigate the evaluation due to the long wait to potentially get in, but in that interim time, most definitely look for an occupational therapist and start getting the plan and the idea of what you can do for your child at home, at school, because that's, while you wait for your appointment, so much can be done. And I agree with Monica very much. And this is where I think we put down, this is where you start your checklist for your child, and I would believe that's the one we're talking about when we're talking about going to school with the child. Am I correct on that, Monica?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe.
Right. And in the article that we wrote, there was a PDF of the checklist for your child that you would send to the school for them to know what's going on.
We have that as a handout on the webinar.
Okay.
So I just want to make people know there's a in your handout. There's that exact checklist is there too. We do have a couple of questions if y'all want to take them, and I think it would probably be more for Monica. I'm an OT from Mexico. I would like to know if you work together with the OT of the same treatment in the same treatment session, or do you use some strategies of sensory processing treatment in your session?
Okay, so the question is both, yes. if it's needed for a child to have a co-treat where speech and OT work together, I think that that's necessary. If that child needs that, I am always using strategies in my session, and depending on what that child needs, because my whole goal for my session is that the child has success. And I say that, and it may sound silly, but a child needs to have success when they come to therapy, because oftentimes for children, they're going to have to be coming to therapy even multiple times a day, or multiple times a week. And, if you had to go to something and you didn't have success at it, you wouldn't want to go. So if I see a reaction, like a child comes in and they start crying, then I have to ask myself as a therapist, is it the environment? What about my session is making them have this reaction? I typically, I like to call, different reactions rather than behaviors, because for me, behaviors has a very negative connotation to it, and oftentimes people will look at it and say, oh, well, I just need to do this, and then they'll stop that behavior. But I think if you address the sensory system first, then you can see, is it truly a behavior, or is it their actual sensory system and the way they're processing the information that is provided to them. So hopefully that clears that up.
And just the thought from a mom's point of view on that, when you said if you have something you don't want to do, you won't want to do it. Our very first occupational therapist would always say you have to leave it on a good note, because that's what will be remembered by the child affected by sensory or disorders. That will be what they remember. So if it is successful, then they will go more readily back. So
yes, most definitely.
This is probably, you probably already answered this. This is from Vanessa. Do either of you have experience of an SLP and OT doing co-treatments? I think you kind of.
Yes, yeah, I do. And I think that it's a valuable tool that, pretty much at my clinic, I leave it up to the therapist and the parents, when we work out a plan for their child, if their child needs a combination of occupational and speech therapy or occupational and physical therapy, we try to make that happen, because our ultimate result is that that child is then successful and achieves their goals. And oftentimes, as a speech therapist, I haven't been trained officially on positioning, on, even in depth in the sensory processing as my occupational therapist has. So I have to rely on them a lot to, and we do therapy in conjunction.
We have not had the co-therapy, though, I'll be honest with you, for all that we've had, and we've had a lot. We haven't had where they've been together. But what I did to sort of make up the void and is to make sure that we shared what the school was doing with our private OT, what the school speech was doing with our private speech, and somehow connect them all together so they all could see where we were. Because that's also helpful too, I think. If you can't get them together, at least communication is what I loved.
And I think, communication is huge, because if we talk about what, combination of therapies might be recommended, these children might be receiving occupational, speech, and physical therapy. And it is very important, and all therapists know that therapists are working together, and sometimes clients may not be going to the same center for all of their therapies. So carrying a communication notebook in between that they can carry from therapy to school, so that everybody is on the same page and can relate to what the child did that they had success with, or what the child needs, is very useful.
And sometimes I would ask the therapist to email to me like the notes from the session, and then I would simply forward those on so that it was a quicker too, and I wouldn't forget, and it wouldn't be lost in, sometimes lost in the translation's hard too, you know, because when therapist to therapist speak, it's such a great thing. When it goes therapist to parent to therapist, there's something, sometimes it is lost a little bit, but sometimes when you just take yourself out of that, it's a cleaner delivery of information.
Yeah, and I mean, I agree. I think the biggest thing is just, you know, trying to have that communication. And I know that it is, you know, it's difficult. It's difficult for therapists, you know, because we have high caseloads, and especially if you're in a school system, I get that. But there's, you know, even just, I noticed this today, or have you had any, you know, has Johnny done this for you, or have you seen this? Just to, you know, get the ball rolling is very beneficial.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think that if we look at the next slide, you'll see that, go one more, Mary, is that this is probably the most important thing, I think, that it's important to remember, is that oftentimes when people think about sensory processing, or they think about the sensory system, you hear all of these terms thrown out like, my child needs a sensory diet, or you know, you'll hear people say, oh, let's put together a sensory diet for that particular child. And then what they do is they end up coming up with a list of activities, and then they'll say, okay, it's 10 o'clock. It's time for Johnny to, you know, take his sensory break. And the thing is that it's not about the activity. It's a process. And it's about recognizing and eventually getting Johnny to recognize that, you know what, I'm feeling like my engine's getting revved, or I'm feeling like I need to go and jump, or getting him to recognize that the activity that he needs that will regulate his system. At first, we as parents, as therapists, we need to do that for them, because they're not in tune with their own body and their reactions. So we need to figure out, okay, Johnny, I can see that, you know, you may need to go and jump, or I see that you need to chew on something. Let's go and let's do your chew tubes, or, you know, so
I think that's so critical, Monica, is to help the child in that verbiage to identify what they're feeling. Because as you help them identify, they then can articulate that out. And I think that's such a big piece of it. If you just say, oh my gosh, you look upset. No, it's, I can see you seem to be, or I can see you struggle with. Because I think as you teach them, that all gets put in, and then later it comes out maybe at the time at school. They'll use it, you know? So I think that's such a good thing, and I very much agree with you that a sensory diet is a very important thing, but sometimes maybe at 10 o'clock, Johnny doesn't want to jump today.
Or he might not eat it.
Because you'll make Johnny jump, but you know, it's about tailoring it and understanding enough to know that he doesn't look like he needs to jump at 10, and you know, that's okay today. He may be more organized till 11 today. So
and
it's
that's
that
the goal, you know? I mean, that's the goal, is to get them to where they can do activities to regulate themselves, just like we as adults do, to keep them regulated throughout the day. And we as adults, I think that, you know, we have to realize that this isn't something separate. This is something that we do every single day as adults. You know, if we need a pick-me-up, you may go get a drink, you know, like a Coke, or have a candy bar, because you recognize that about your system. You know, you see adults chewing on their fingernails, and that's because they're thinking, they're concentrating, they need that in order to get themselves organized.
And how often, like at the end of the day, and you know, like my son will have the TV on, but he's not in the room, but he'll be talking to me, and I'll be thinking of something, and all of a sudden you can almost say, okay, that's it, I'm full. I need 5 minutes, I just need to stop. See, that's the recognition. And as you teach it, that's the strength you give them, and that's their self-advocacy, which is obviously the goal as well. And Elizabeth has been taught that, and we went on vacation, sidebar, and she was very overloaded from the drive down, and you could see it, but, you know, all the teaching we did and all the stuff we've done, she went around and systematically turned off all the lights, and we're thinking, why are we turning the lights off? And then she said, you know, I'm going in my room, I'm going to lay down for a couple of minutes, this is too much. And she did. 20 minutes later, she came out, she got some ice cream, she was good to go. I was so proud of that. You know, I love seeing the work. So start early.
Yeah, definitely. And just remember that it's about the process and the progress. And we always want, if we look at our next slide, we, you know, therapy, any activity, the most important thing is that they should have success and it should be fun, because you know, therapy and life experiences, it's a dance that we do, and we do it every day. You know, as a therapist, my job is to see, you know, how far can I push you until your system can't take that, and then I have to back off, and then I slowly will try again. But I have to be able to read what is happening in your body with your system. We know that as speech therapists, what we see in the body, we're going to see in the mouth, and we know that that reaction, just like Michelle said at the beginning, if you're not in a good place mentally, it's going to be hard for you to concentrate on answering WH questions, or it's going to be hard for you to concentrate on where your tongue needs to go to make a certain sound. And, you know, it's going to be hard for you to sit still in school and participate and to focus. So,
because it is the whole person you're looking at. It isn't the sensory system. It's the whole person. It's the oral part with the sensory part with the world. And it's just a big, it all works together, you know, with a good awareness. So that was a very big important part for us, is to see that Elizabeth wasn't a sensory processing child. She was Elizabeth who had sensory processing disorder. And that's when you start to fill in the puzzle pieces and she becomes this whole person, you know, as you understand her.
And you know, one of the biggest things that I learned from, you know, Dr. Miller was that, you know, when you look at a whole person, what you're actually doing is you're looking at what is their arousal level. And then the second most important thing is that you're looking at what is that relationship that you have with that child. And that's really where the success of therapy is going to happen, is through that relationship. And we want to give, you know, our job as therapists is to give that knowledge to parents so that they can have that relationship in order to have success throughout the day. Because, I mean, you know, my parents have heard me say this and my students have heard me say it 1,000 times, but our parents are, you know, the biggest member on our team, because they're the ones who are going to be working with their child day in and day out. You know, the child just seeing us for an hour a week, or, you know, even sometimes just once a month, it's not going to have the same impact as their parent being able to work with them successfully.
In my one book, I did write that, you know, we would get our homework, because that's what I called it, and we would have follow-up at home for the occupational therapy, for the speech, because if you really think, like, an hour a day, you know, you can't even, you know, if you're going to exercise and get in shape, it isn't going to be you do it once a week. You're going to need to do things, and same idea goes, you know, it's doing it as often as you can in a way that is fun. Like I said before, if you sit down at a table and plop papers down and say you are doing speech papers, you are not going to be fun, and they're going to not want to. But approached the correct way, they're going to be looking forward to it. I mean, Elizabeth, some of my dearest friends to this day are the very therapists we've become the friends with, because they have been that person for her, the ones that made it fun, but we had great success. And like you said, for the parents, the thing I just wanted to add very quickly is, as the school year's into its third week, sometimes even a month, it's such a good time, you know, to really look at some of those sheets that are the communications to the school, because you can, like I give you the one, it's written long because apparently I have a lot to say. it's about Elizabeth, and it just gives them an update on her. And then it tells everybody, the teachers and all the people, what you have done, what you are working on, what she liked, what she didn't like, what you can see in her sensory issues now. Maybe she's in crying now, but maybe she will not talk now. You know, how do you know it changed? So let them all know, and let everybody know in the school, including the secretary. Because if your child has a problem, the secretary needs to know she has this disorder. And then, like I said, communication is critical to the school. And if you can take a peek at those things we have ready at your for availability for you, see what you can tailor make for your child, and then just keep doing it every year, because that's how you get everybody to work as that team. So I have felt that needed said.
Great. Yeah.
So, okay. Well, I'm good here. I was looking for the one paper. I'm good.
Did we have any more questions, Mary?
I don't see any more questions. I'm going to throw it out to the group to see if anyone does. And also, you know, like I said, we're going to have your information on our follow-up email, and they can also contact TalkTools as well. They can contact me directly to get any questions over to you guys.
Yeah, and our, you know, unfortunately, you know, today we just had limited amount of time, but in our sensory processing class, we actually, you know, spend a whole day looking more in depth at this information, and we go through evaluating our own sensory system. I know that at the STAR Institute, they have online courses that you can take for continuing education, for if you want to recommend that to your therapist. You know, or even for yourself, just for your own knowledge.
Monica has a couple of courses in December for this subject, and then we are going to have a webinar in a couple of weeks, a continuing education for CEUs webinar. That's on.
Yes.
We'll you know, we'll get information out to everybody, but it looks like we have no questions now. But like I said, we're available to answer anything. Maybe you get off the webinar and you're, you know, wanting to, you have some questions. That's perfectly, you know, all right with us. And we just thank everybody for taking the time to do this, and we're excited. We're going to have more of these. And do you all have any more comments or anything for the group? You guys?
I just want to encourage the parents, you know, take a moment, breathe, don't let it overwhelm you, because the journey is long, but you know, if you just arm yourself with knowledge and become that advocate, then good things will happen.
Great. All right, guys, thanks a lot, and we'll be, like I said, we'll send out some information, and you'll get that also, that special discount order or discount code as well. I'll try to get that out to everybody today, and everybody have a good rest of your weekend.
Thank you all.
And we hope to see you on some other webinars or courses. So thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.